Tonight, we have the privilege to have Don Martin with us. So, Donald Martin helped us with an elk hunting webinar a while back, and it's just super apparent after spending any time with him that he's extremely passionate about wildlife conservation, and he's a very knowledgeable and proficient hunter. He's the California president of the Wild Sheep Foundation and is a lifelong elk hunter and guide. So Don was the recipient of the Outstanding Guide Award. And Don, let me preface this question to you just as a reminder. If you are asked about something, it's not considered bragging. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about this Outstanding Guide Award and a little bit about how you got into Tule elk hunting.
Um, okay, that's a good question to kind of help introduce myself to the individuals in the room. I want to thank the 83 of you that have joined us. I can only tell you that thank you for participating. Your participation makes this possible. And want to thank Eric Elliott and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Somebody asked me one time, how do you win Guide of the Year? Well, you win it one client at a time. And it's really about dedication to the person standing next to you, being the best person you can be, working hard for your brother. I like to joke that I'm best friend for hire as a guide. And that just kind of culminated after 20 years, 21, 22 years in the business, received that incredible honor, the highest honor in the guide industry, highest honor there is for a guide. It was the most validating experience of my life for what many people would consider a lifetime of questionable decisions, especially for a smart kid that I could have gone to the Naval Academy and I had all these other options, but yet somehow the professional hunting industry, guiding, the outdoors, fishing, guiding anglers, it chooses you. You find your place and you find your niche, and that's what it was for me. So that's one of the greatest things about my whole personal story was discovering that back in the 90s. My personal relationship with Tule Elk, I started applying in the 80s. I drew my first permit in 97, and I did not get a bull, but I had a great experience and I learned a lot. And by the grace of God, I drew another bull tag in 1999, and I killed my first Tule elk in 99. And it took a little while later, but I was fortunate to draw another bull tag years later and was able to take a Tule elk with a bow.
That's awesome.
Yeah, wonderful experience. The culmination of a lifetime of hard work and dedication, and never giving up hope. And I think everybody in the room, if you haven't drawn a permit yet, don't give up. And we get down to the end of the talk, we can talk about drawing permit strategies, because we live in a whole new world now. There's all these new opportunities that didn't exist back in the 90s. But after 30 years of being in the Tule elk game and guiding Tule elk for a long time now, I can tell you there's new opportunities. Your chances of drawing a Tule elk permit today are better than they've ever been before. So
it's amazing. How many tags have you drawn?
I've drawn 3 bull tags.
Wow.
Over the
Amazing.
last 30 years. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't
Incredible.
drawn a sheep tag yet, so I'm not that lucky. But
Well, we'll
I've
keep
been
our fingers crossed on that one.
very fortunate. Yeah, we just did the Bighorn Sheep Seminar on Saturday. Great turnout. Special thanks to everybody from Department of Fish and Wildlife that turned out for the Bighorn Sheep Seminar. We had a great meeting. Congratulations to all the tag holders, and good luck this fall.
Outstanding.
All right, do you want to get going here, Eric?
Let's go ahead, Don.
All right, so tonight's going to be history of the Tule Elk here in the great state of California. And my presentation, I've given this several times across the country, East Coast, Midwest, and finally, this is an updated version I've done here specifically for the Advanced Hunter Education Series for today, July 23rd, 2024. So let's dive into this full steam. Here we go. We can't talk about the history of the Tule Elk without talking about a brief history of the state of California. State of California history outlined by the periods that you see before you, the 10,000 BC to 1500 AD history, prehistory, which is predominantly indigenous peoples. California has an incredible Native American population, an incredibly diverse Native American population. We have 574 federally recognized tribes in the U.S. 110 of those tribes are here in the California, and I believe there's another 81 groups that are seeking federal recognition, but nearly 20% of all federally recognized Indian tribes are here in the state of California. And if you've been following current fish and game politics, especially Klamath River politics, the Yurok tribe is the predominant tribe in Northern California, as a native people. 1549 to 1762, the European exploration period. This marks the reintroduction of horses to the North American landscape. Native North American equine species went extinct over 11,000 years ago, and the reintroduction of these horses has had tremendous impact to the North American landscape, especially Western mountain states. It's a very contentious issue. If you're interested in that, look into the Wild Horse Protection Act, and there's several really great short films regarding wild horses and their impact on the North American landscape. 1769 to 1821, the Spanish period. This is obviously marked by the establishment of the 21 Spanish missions up and down the California coast. Very popular. Everybody is familiar with them, you know, like San Juan Bautista, San Juan Capistrano, etc. They're all tourist destination. It marks the expansion of Catholicism into state of California. 1821 to 1848, the Mexican period. Mexico won its independence in 1821, and this really sparked a tumultuous time in the great state of California. The Spanish missions were closed. Spanish immigrants came to be known as Californios. They were essentially abandoned by the Mexican government. And then subsequently, there was a whole series of tumultuous events that led to the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, which ultimately led to Mexico relinquishing any claim to the state of California. And then in 1850, California became America's 31st state. So if we're going to look at the historical range of elk at about the time, or let's say pre Western expansion, you're looking at a tremendous amount of the Central Valley and coastal California here on this map provided by California Department of Fish and Wildlife. The Tule elk, everything from the foothills of the east side of the Central Valley to the coast was the Tule elk habitat. And there were as many as 500,000 Tule elk in the state of California prehistory. You see a tremendous amount of Roosevelt elk in Northwest California. And even historically, the Rocky Mountain elk, they were pretty much constrained to the northeast corner. You're basically looking at elk that are immigrating cross-border from southern Oregon and coming out of southwest Idaho. So let's talk about factors towards extirpation of the Tule elk. So during the Spanish and Mexican periods, we saw a tremendous expansion of cattle across the California landscape. And the history of the Tule Elk is marked by a tremendous conflict with the cattle industry. There is no greater conflict for the Tule Elk in their history than conflict with cattle. And that's always been the conflict. And today, even today, the biggest conflict with Tule Elk is with the cattlemen, cattle ranchers up and down the state of California, Mendocino, all the way down to the Timber Wildlife Management area. Loss of the habitat to agriculture. The Central Valley basically became the breadbasket of the world, and the Tule elk that resided throughout the Central Valley were suddenly they were no longer welcome there. The wetlands of the Delta region and the history of the Tulare Lake. If you really want to read some interesting California history, read on the loss of the Tulare Lake. It's really fascinating, but tremendous loss of habitat to agriculture where, you know, ground was levied off and drained and recaptured for agricultural purposes, and Tule elk were shut out. And obviously unregulated market hunting, this is going to be the biggest culprit that negatively impacted the history of the Tule elk, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the factors as to why that was such. So what happened? Well, let's make it real simple. Gold, Eureka, they found it. 1848, gold is discovered at Sutter's Mill, January 1848. This is the most significant historical event in the history of the state of California. This flake of gold that you're looking at right now, that's on display in the Smithsonian, supposedly is the gold. This is the piece of gold that started the gold rush. Is that true or not? Probably not, but it sounds pretty good. So we've all heard this romance stories about gold in California, and you just come to California for the gold. There's nuggets in the streams. You just walk down the stream and pick them up. This is the actual piece of gold in the Smithsonian. It is a fraction of the size of your pinky fingernail, yet this dramatically changed the history of California and changed the history of the world, and unfortunately changed the history of the Tule elk. So giving you an idea here, an overview of the gold fields in California. You can see what they refer to as the mother lode country, running from the Feather River down to, let's say that's the McCullamy, the Calaveras, and the Tuolumne, maybe the Merced. That's what's known as the mother lode region, and then we have the gold fields between Shasta and Wairika as well, and the two major cities at the time, cities of San Francisco and the city of Sacramento. Now, the gold rush led to this incredible expansion of population into the state of California. And back then, the railway had not reached California yet. We're decades away from the connection of the railway to the East Coast. They had to come by boat. So everybody came to California, and if they sailed up through the Delta, they ended up at Sacramento, and then from there, they made their way as far as they could go up the American River before they either started walking or got on a horse and wagon or et cetera. But the gross expansion of the city of San Francisco was overwhelming, and these people had to eat. And at the time, there was no hunting regulations. And so wildlife as a whole, and this is across all spectrums, deer, elk, ducks, waterfowl, upland game, absolutely decimated to feed this flood of humanity that showed up in San Francisco 1848 and 1849. So San Francisco is down about here. This is the California Delta. The California Delta, for a lot of people, they don't realize, for the Central Valley, all rivers up north flow south, all rivers down south flow north. They all meet in the middle, and it becomes this great big train wreck maze of rivers and channels. It's absolutely one of the most spectacular places in California. If you've never been on the California Delta, you know, I suggest you explore it, especially if you're a fisherman. Why? Because the California Delta is one of the top bass fishing destinations in the United States of America. You're looking right there. That's my new PB. I caught that fish last year on the California Delta, fishing late season on a frog, over 12 pounds, my personal best. And I've been a lifelong bass fisherman and tournament angler, but that truly is a special fish. It speaks to the quality of bass fishing that exists on the California Delta. If you've never experienced it, get out and explore the California Delta. It's absolutely a wonderful place, beautiful. So San Francisco experiences this gross expansion of humanity. The whole world descends on San Francisco in the course of about 18 months. And it dramatically changes the state of California forever. You know, let's say pre-gold rush, there was 100,000 Native Americans, 5,000 Americans, and about 1,000 of the Californios left over after the Mexican War. 500,000 people descended on San Francisco in 18 months. It dramatically changed the landscape. Changed the landscape forever. Ultimately, the 500,000 people that came in 1849 created the state of California. California became a state in 1850. And now the people that lived in California in 1848, they absolutely hated the people that showed up in 1849. They viewed California as an Eden, and they viewed the 49ers as showing up and ruining the whole thing. And if this is the only thing you learn tonight's talk, congratulations. Now you understand why they're called the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers represent the flood of humanity that showed up in San Francisco that ultimately led to California becoming a state. A lot of people don't know that. Now you do. Now you can be the guy at the party that tells everybody why they're called the 49ers.
Love it.
All right, so let's start talking about elk. So we're going to talk about the road to recovery, and that road to recovery starts quite a bit later. You know, we're talking this is 14 years later. By now, the Tule elk are thought to be extinct. In 1873, the Tule elk are discovered, and they're discovered by this guy on the right side of your screen. His name is Henry Miller. He is a part of what became known as the Miller-Lux Cattle Corporation. They own more ground in Southern California, I think, than God and everybody else combined. The Tule elk that were discovered on his property west of Bakersfield in 1873, and I've heard a lot of numbers, but the number that I've heard the most over the last 30 years is 12. However, you're going to hear some people say that all Tule elk can be traced back to one breeding pair. And that may still be true, but I still heard the number was 12. Now, Henry Miller had a real soft spot in his heart as a cattleman for elk, and he wanted to save them. And he put a bounty on anybody that poached an elk, and he had all of his vaqueros protect these elk out across the landscape west of Bakersfield in the late 1800s. Now, by 1900, he's now got 120 of them. Okay, so he's got tenfold the elk he had just a few years before. Now it's starting to cramp his style. Again, conflict between cattle and elk, because 128 elk eat a lot of grass. So he decides he's got to start trying to move these elk around and spread them back out, but more importantly, get them off his property. So in 1904, we see the first translocation attempt, and this is just an absolute train wreck. This is often referred to as the Sequoia experiment, where they tried to move Tule elk from Southern California to Sequoia National Park, and they had a 100% mortality rate. All the cows died. The only elk that actually made it to Sequoia National Park was a bull. And when they released the bull into the park, they had cut his horns off for transport. Well, the elk didn't realize he didn't have any horns. And when they let him out of this wooden crate, he was so fired up, he ran out into a meadow in the national park, picked a fight with a mule deer who had antlers, and the mule deer gored and killed the elk. And
Wow.
100% mortality. It was a train wreck. It was a 100% failed attempt. And I mean, they learned a lot in that experience. By 1914, now the Southern California herd is 400 elk. And now Miller, more than ever, wants the elk to go away. So he's offering elk to anybody that will take them. 1915, we come up to the Del Monte experiment. This is a really, for those of you in the room that golf, you might have heard of a place called Pebble Beach. Del Monte, maybe you've seen the canned vegetables. They're kind of a big deal. So Del Monte acquires Pebble Beach and the surrounding golf courses and a tremendous amount of ground in western Monterey County. And they decide that they're going to have some of Henry Miller's elk up there so that people can walk the golf course, and in the surrounding forest from time to time, they can view the elk, and it will be a tourist attraction. Well, what the Del Monte Corporation didn't realize is that the Tule elk is a prairie elk. They're not a forest elk, and they don't want to live in the trees. And the elk ended up living on the golf course in the wide open all the time. And it didn't take them very long to realize that once elk became acclimated to humans, and then the rut hit, territorial bulls chasing golfers at a time where they carried their own clubs or were caddied, there were no golf carts. That just didn't work out for golfers in Monterey County in the early 1900s. And so they backpedaled in a big way on that, and they did everything in their power to make the elk go away. Ironically, this train wreck that happened in Monterey County leads to one of the big early successes of the Tule elk program. We're going to talk about that in a second. But ultimately, all the Tule elk were eventually extirpated for a second time in Monterey County. So Monterey County is the only county in the state of California where Tule elk were not extirpated once, but twice. And in 1921, we have an additional experiment called the Yosemite experiment, in which some of these Southern California elk found their way to Yosemite, but when they got there, they ended up putting them in a 28-acre pen. And Henry Miller was adamant that he didn't want the elk to be behind wire. He wanted the elk to be free. He didn't want them to be in pens. He didn't really want them to be in zoos. He wanted the elk to be free range. And so the Yosemite experiment, it didn't take very long for the 16 elk shipped to Yosemite to outgrow their 28-acre pen. Now, again, the Yosemite experiment was a failure, but it was a failure that led to success. So, with those failures behind the program, in 1923, the Del Monte elk were moved, and I believe that they were gifted to the Sacramento Zoo, and the Sacramento Zoo didn't realize they didn't have the space, they couldn't take care of them, and they made a deal with the Payne Ranch in Colusa and Lake counties, and they moved the remaining Del Monte elk into what is now the Cache Creek herd. And the Cache Creek herd is one of the most successful Tule elk herds in the state of California. It is the first successful transplant of Tule elk for a free-ranging herd in the state. And about 10 years later, Henry Miller decides he really wants the elk off the property, and he talks the state of California into forming the California State Tule Elk Preserve, which is the Button Willow Preserve that was established in 1932. And they rounded up as many as they could. They didn't catch them all, but they rounded up as many as they could, and those elk went into the nearly 1,000 acre California State Tule Elk Preserve located at Button Willow. That preserve still exists today, still has elk living behind the wire. And I know the state wants to make all of the captive herds eventually go away. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then in 1933, we have this first translocation to Owens Valley. This is a wildly interesting translocation effort, because the Owens Valley is so far out of historical Tule elk range. However, it's absolutely ideal habitat. And the Owens Valley herd was initially established with the remainder of the failed Yosemite elk herd experiment that went wrong. So Walter Dow was the California rancher in the Owens Valley that said, hey, bring the elk to the Owens Valley. This is literally the best place for the elk. And here you can see these elk are already very acclimated to people. You're feeding them a slice of apple right there. That's not the case anymore. They're all wild, free-ranging elk over there in the Owens Valley, Independence, Lone Pine, that whole region. But the process was physical and arduous and clumsy, and capture myopathy was high, meaning a lot of animals, the stress of the capture alone would kill them. And they had to crate them up in this kind of clumsiness. And there was a lot of physical effort in trying to move these animals. So the fact that they actually got to the Owens Valley and that they were established there, this is a huge success for the recovery of the Tule elk and the beginning of what is now some of the best Tule elk hunting in the state, the whole Owens Valley region and the surrounding units. So in 1943, you can see that they reopened Tule elk hunting, and they started in the Owens Valley, and they made 7 permits available, and they started hunting them. And they started kind of pecking away at the elk here and there. And by 1960, there were 4 herds established, but these herds were still struggling. The Tule elk was not out of the woods, so to speak. And to be honest, they're just big picture. There was not that many of them in 1960. So if we look at this map, this is going to be I believe this is the 1970 Circum map. You can see how restricted the elk range in the state of California is here. The Roosevelt Range has been highly restricted up here into the northwest. The Rocky Mountain elk range is down to this little bit of a dot here. This is the Cache Creek herd that was translocated. This is the Owens Valley herd over here. And this is the button with this dot right here is the Button Willow herd. This is the 950 acre pen constructed to house the bulk of what remained from the original Tule elk. And then you have a couple of herds of elk. These elk out here on the island, I think this is mislabeled. I believe these were Roosevelt elk introduced to Santa Cruz. And this is kind of a rogue herd of Rocky Mountain elk on the Tejon Ranch. They were introduced down there under somewhat dubious circumstances, as is this herd of elk here, which is in the Hearst Castle region, that there's a lot of question marks about the origins of some of the elk here in the Hearst Castle region. So in 1971, California decides, okay, there's just not enough elk. We're going to end Tule elk hunting. Okay. And the most important thing is that 5 years later, there's a huge effort to pass federal protection, and the Tule Elk Protection Act passes the U.S. Congress in 1976. Now, this dramatically changes uh, the kind of the environment for California Fish and Wildlife to do their jobs, because now all these federal lands are open to the reintroduction of Tule elk, and the very next year, those translocations on federal lands begin, and those are to this day some of our most successful units are a result of this Tule Elk Protection Act. This included translocations to the Concord Naval Weapons Base, the Fort Hunter Liggett Base, Camp Roberts, and the Mendocino National Forest. So this opened all those federal lands, whereas before the state was not able to move those elk to those lands. So 1978 through 1985, there's a wild amount of translocations that continue. Grizzly Island, now one of the best units in the state. South San Benito County, Western Merced County, the Parkfield area, which now has tremendous Tule elk hunting, San Ardo area, and then Point Reyes National Seashore, which ultimately becomes a very interesting point in Tule elk history. And by 1988, Tule elk hunting resumes, and we have been hunting the Tule elk ever since. So now we can kind of look at a 2017 map, and you can start to see gross expansion of the Roosevelt elk in Northwest California, a gross expansion of the Rocky Mountain elk in Northeast California. This is the Cache Creek herd, the East Park, the Lake Pillsbury, the Mendocino. This is all of that. Okay, here's your Grizzly Island elk over here. This is your Point Reyes elk over here. This is everything Gavilan, Central Coast, down to La Ponza. This is the San Luis captive herd, which is a seed stock herd. And I know that California Fish and Wildlife would like this captive herd to also go away. This is the remaining buttonwillow herd. And again, we see an expansion of Tule elk up and down the valley in the Owens Valley region. And we still have this pocket of Rocky Mountain elk on the Tejon, as well as some questionable genetics out here in the Hearst Castle area. So just looking at the last 47 years of conservation efforts, you can see this dramatic expansion of elk across the landscape in the state of California. And you can recognize how special California is, because we are the only state that has all three elk species. We are the only state that over a long enough timeline, you might draw all three tags and take all three species. And it's been done. I don't know how many people have done it, but I know it's been done. I've read several articles by guys that have spent their whole life chasing this, trying to get all three elk out of California, and they have done it. The Tule elk is the hard one. I will tell you that much right now. So here's last year's hunt zones, including these are the new hunt zones, kind of in here. You see the Gavilan and the Central Coast zone. These are new for this year. So there's been an expansion of the program. The department is working hard to create additional opportunity. You can see that the Owens Valley has been chopped into a whole host of units. And I think if you draw the archery tag, you might be able to hunt all of these if you draw the archery only permit. You see expansion of the Tehachapi unit because of the growth of the elk populations down there. This is identified as now an intensive elk management zone. And so there's tremendous opportunity in the state of California for elk, and there's a lot of programs that can help you towards your goal to elk hunt in California, and we can talk about those here in a little bit. This is my area of expertise. I guide in Monterey County. So, you know, again, this is the region up here of the Del Monte experiment. Everything, this Pebble Beach, Pacific Grove, you know, residents of the city of Pacific Grove, there was a complaint by the city that was part of that whole effort to get the Tule elk out back in the early 1900s because the elk were coming right into town. So you've got Monterey County. Here is, this is a map of the Salinas Fremont Peak unit. And here's City of Salinas. My guide area is roughly right here between Salinas and San Juan Bautista. That's my primary area of focus. And you know, here's an example of some bulls in the field in Monterey. This is late summer. They're still in the velvet. We've got a good diverse group here. This is mostly looking like 3-year-old bulls with one older age class bull right here. You can tell by this belly line, the amount of musculature on this bull compared to his buddies here, the amount of mass in his neck, the slope of his back, and his antler conformation is starting to do funny stuff. He's got extra points down low. He still carries his mass, but he's no longer symmetrical. This is a bull that's regressing. This is a bull that's probably a 7-year-old. And he's really starting to show his age a little bit. This is a bull that's not going to get shot. This is a bull that's going to die of old age. And good for him because he fulfilled his job for maximizing reproductive potential. That's why the Salinas herd is still growing in northern Monterey County. So looking at a couple of bulls, this is me on the left, buddy of mine out of Connecticut on the right. This is a good example of a trophy Tule elk bull. It has a lot of the main characteristics for Tule elk. These wavy main beams is kind of a notable characteristic of Tule elk. Wide inside spread. They tend to be a little shorter in the tine than Rockies and Roosevelts, but they often develop extra points and great crowns. That's actually very common for Tule elk. These bulls usually maxing out at about 550 to 600 pounds. 600 pounds would be a great big giant one, my opinion, unless they're exposed to extraordinary quality of feed or other minerals or supplements. This is the city of Salinas back here in the background. This is right outside of town. I still can't believe how many people live in Salinas and have never seen an elk. You literally can see them from the road, but I think they think they're just cattle. This is a great bull. Again, this is demonstrating the crowns that I talked about, extra points at the top, good bull, good inside spread, wavy main beams. This bull with a big question mark main beam. The Tule elk can be really unusual. They're truly snowflakes. They're not very often. You don't see them, these kind of typical slick sixes where they're all kind of cookie cutter. They really do have tremendous character. Every Tule elk truly is special. Every Tule elk is a trophy. Here's a great big giant slick six. This is actually rare. This bull's he's got it all down low. He's got really tremendous growth over the nose, great G1 brow tines, tremendous length. He's really strong on the sword point. More importantly, when you're looking for trophy Tule elk, finishing strong back here, the G5s or the whale tails, as some people say. If these elk finish really strong off the back, you're looking at a quality bull. That's probably a bull you want to be thinking about harvesting, especially looking at kind of certain minimums like Are his main beams over 40? Is he over 40 inside? How does he finish off the back on his G5s? If he checks all those boxes, you're probably looking at, a bull is going to be a bull that is safe to take out of the population. He's done his job in terms of reproductive activity. He's in all likelihood he's just going to get smaller. So I wouldn't feel bad about going ahead and trying to take him out.
Hey,
No,
Donald, can I
go
interrupt
ahead,
you right there? I was
go
just,
for it.
what is that last bowl score? What's a, what do you, I know you made a point that any Tule elk is a trophy, and I love that. I love that about you and your other talk too. It's not just about points, but just out of curiosity, what are you, what do you consider a trophy Tule elk for like Boone and Crockett?
Okay, so if we're going to use Boone and Crockett as the benchmark, that's a good benchmark. Boone and Crockett minimum score for the book is 285.
Hmm.
All right. So what you're looking at here, this bull taken by a friend of mine out of Fairfield, that bull you're looking at right there is a 289. Okay,
Wow.
so that one's going to make the all-time record book. And they do get a lot bigger. The bulls down in Paso Robles are notorious for being bigger. And to tell you the truth, every single unit in the state of California, if you draw a public tag, every single unit has the potential to produce something special, and certainly has the potential to produce a Boone and Crockett caliber animal, because it really is a combination of age, the quality of the feed, that particular year in terms of year and feed, in terms of antler growth, and then genetic potential. Um, and every unit has tremendous potential. Grizzly Island produces giants. The Owens Valley has produced some of the biggest Tule elk ever harvested. Um, the biggest Tule elk I've ever heard of came out of Grizzly Island, and I believe it was a bull that died on the there on Grizzly Island, and the antlers were salvaged. They found it dead in a slough, and it was an enormous bull. I don't even want to say the score because it'll just ruin people for Tule elk. You know, but it truly was a unique animal, and because they grow so much non-typical antler and extra points, keep in mind there's no penalty for extra points past the crown point. Everything's free in terms of the scoring system. That's where it differs from Rocky Mountain elk, Tule elk, and Roosevelt's. Everything past the G4 is usually is a freebie. There's no deductions past the G4. So you've got this opportunity to pick up a lot of extra points, score wise, if you're lucky enough to take a bull that's a 7x7 or a 7x8 or a 8x9. This is another big slick six. This one with exceptional G5s off the back. This is actually rare. This bull was a bit of a fighter. I watched this bull all October. He was out on the front of the ranch fighting. He broke his sword point and then repolished it a little bit here. He broke both sword points early in the season, and we caught up with him in December. And my hunter here from the East Coast was lucky enough to take that bull. That bull also right at Boone and Crockett minimum. I think he actually nets out due to deductions, but this is just like a 286 type bull. This is a very special bull. Now we're talking about getting into some of the more special bulls that I've guided and been a part of. This bull is the biggest bodied Tule elk we've ever taken off the ranch. Extraordinary elk in terms of body size, great mass, great inside spread, great beam length, and just absolute tremendous length from top to bottom. Very special bull, harvested by Susan Toohey out of Michigan. She is one of the top female hunters in the world. This bull harvested with a handgun at 18 yards was one of the most incredible elk hunting experiences of my life. This bull, number 3 in the world, with a handgun. This was a very, very special bull. Hanging carcass weight was 305 pounds. So that's a big Tule elk. Moving on, talking about archery hunting. When you're bow hunting for any elk, let alone Tule elk, they're all a trophy with a bow. The chance to hunt them is rare. The chance to kill one with a bow is even rarer. This is a good buddy of mine out of Minnesota, came out and hunted with us. And this particular bull, this is an older age class bull. It's got a really tremendous body size, mature bull, going downhill, carries his mass, as you can see. Mark can't hardly get his hands around the horn, but he starts to shorten up in the beam and he starts to get a little wonky. This is actually very common for bulls as they get over 7 years old. This might be an 8-year-old bull here. This is a bull that I watched for a couple of years, and I noticed he was on the downhill, and Mark was more than happy to take him with a bow. This helping Mark continue on his way toward his North American 29 with a bow. And this bull, good buddy of mine, Tim out of Louisiana, came out. This bull was his North American 29. The Tule elk was the last animal he needed to finish his North American 29 achievement. All species of North America taken, and he just needed a Tule elk, and I'm glad he was willing to come down and hunt with me. And this was another example of he could see a much bigger bull, but having a successful hunt and finishing the North American 29 was far more important than killing the biggest bull on the ranch. This is one of those questions you have to ask yourself, because you're going to face it at some point. You have to choose your happiness. You have to really understand what your goal is. And in this case, the goal was a North American 29. And so when this 6-point bull stepped out at 20 yards and he could see the biggest bull on the ranch at about 80, and this bull got a little squirrely and had winded him, and he took advantage of the opportunity. Chip shot for a world-class bow hunter like Tim. He was able to go ahead and harvest the bull. Bull only ran 100 yards. It was awesome. Died in a great place. We could literally drive the rig right to it, and it was a wonderful experience, wonderful hunt. Now we're going to start looking at I got a couple examples here of, now we're talking about kind of getting into the holy grail of Tule elk. These are the bulls that check all the boxes. When you're thinking about hunting Tule elk, and if you're thinking about trophy Tule elk, really what you're looking at is a bull that has the beams, has the inside spread, has the length over the nose, but more importantly, he crowns at the top, has extra points. He's got the palmation and the mass to go with it. This great bull taken by my buddy JW out of Texas. He shows up with a 1,000-yard rifle, and I think we shot him at 180. We just crawled up and laid on him, and we lay there and cooked in the sun for about 3 hours, but the shot finally developed, and patience paid off, and he was able to take a world-class Tule elk. And this one fulfilled his Grand Slam of North American elk. He had killed a Roosevelt. Actually, I take it back. He's hunting Roosevelt elk this fall with a good buddy of mine in Humboldt County. And then this one, again, this is the ranch record bull for our part of the world. This bull killed on the very top of the ranch, as you can see. And again, strong over the nose. He's got the beams, he's got the inside width, but more importantly, he has these just wildly developed crowns, good tops, bifurcated tops on both sides. Just a beautiful 8x9. This bull, number 4 in the world with a muzzleloader. Just a absolutely tremendous elk. If you're lucky enough to draw a Tule elk tag and you see anything that remotely looks like that, you're going to want to start putting the sneak on it and take advantage of the opportunity. So with that said, just want to say a quick thank you to the Department of Fish and Wildlife for inviting me to speak. I have a tremendous passion about Tule Elk. Thank you, Eric Elliott. And I want to thank all of you that attended. And just in terms of references and recommended reading, most of my information in this talk is gleaned from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and Dennis Bloom's The Dwarf Elk Chronicles. This is a brilliant book. There's a tremendous amount of additional anecdotal stories regarding the history of the Tule elk, including additional successful transplants, additional failures. Dwarf Elk Chronicles, great book. And in terms of the history of the state of California, especially during the westward expansion and pre-statehood, Irving Stone's Men to Match My Mountains is probably the landmark work about the history of the westward expansion. That is a spectacular read. I would recommend that to anyone willing to read it. So with that said, we can move on to Q&A, and you're also welcome to email me any questions or concerns at my email there. That's Don-Martin, not underscore, Don-Martin at earthlink.net.
That's
All right.
awesome. Thank you, Donald. Really thorough presentation, and I love the history, and I love the success story of the conservation effort with Tule elk. There are a lot of questions that are coming in, and one of the questions I'd like you to address is how are all the out-of-state hunters getting drawn and able to hunt with you? And the question is this like a PLM hunt?
Okay, that's a great question. So let's talk about tags. So currently, if you want to hunt Tule elk, all right, there's 3 ways to get a permit. Okay, number 1 is the general draw, in which you get 1 choice and non-residents get 1 tag. So it is nearly impossible for non-residents to draw that permit. However, I know people who have done it. So the general draw is the toughest way to go for non-residents. It's actually, if you have max points, it's actually a really good way to go for you as a resident, especially if you start doing the math and you decide what's important to you. Do I want to kill a bull, or do I just want to kill an elk, a Tule elk? Because there's a lot of really good cow hunts that the draw odds are spectacular. Okay, so the general draw, that's number 1. 2 is PLM, private land management. So I guide for a PLM property. My PLM property, we have 8,000 acres, and the ranch is issued 4 cows and two bulls per year. Those tags are only good for the ranch. The ranch becomes its own unit. So a public land hunter, if you draw the Gavilan tag, you cannot hunt the ranch where I guide, because the ranch is its own unit. Okay, so there is some separation between these programs. And so a lot of my elk are through PLM. Okay, that's private land management, where the landowner who is involved in a wildlife conservation effort, they have standards and requirements set down by the state that they have to meet to take care of the wildlife, and in doing so, they are rewarded, or in some cases compensated, due to wildlife damage with the permits, which are then transferable. And there are many PLM properties that do not sell their permits. There are many PLM properties that do not even hunt the elk on their ranch. It's a point of contention within PLM. Okay, so that's the second program. The third program, and this is the program that is growing, and that's the SHARE program, which is the Shared Habitat Alliance for Recreational Enhancement. That's the acronym. The SHARE program, and I'm going to tell you right now, is your best chance to draw an elk tag in the state of California. In the general draw, you get one choice. In the share program, you can apply for every single property that has an elk tag. So if you want to spend $100, you can purchase $100 worth of applications. If you want to spend $600, which I think for a resident or even non-resident, I think if you apply for every permit available, you're going to be in for $600. But I'm going to tell you, the odds are way better, and they're way better for non-residents in share versus the general draw. But they're way better for residents because you can apply for all of them. So you're not just in one time for one choice. You can apply for every property that's currently enrolled in share. You have to decide, one, what's your goal, and two, what's convenient for you. You may not want to apply for a ranch that's a 6-hour drive, but if there's 3 or 4 ranches within a couple hours, why would you not apply for those elk permits? Especially for the price point. It's actually more cost effective to apply for share than to apply for the general draw. And if you do not have max points in the general draw, you need to give serious consideration to applying for the share permits where points do not apply. So you need to take all of that into consideration to maximize your opportunity to draw an elk and give yourself an opportunity to hunt Tule elk in California. It truly is. It is the greatest conservation success story perhaps on earth. It is the rarest big game animal in North America, one of the rarest big game animals in the world. And yet we get to hunt them every year. We just have to figure out a way to get the tag. But I'm living proof. I've drawn 3 over the last 30 years. It can be done. And I never had max points.
Outstanding. What an opportunity. Let's talk a little bit about bugling. Some questions came in about, do Rocky Mountain elk and Tule elk bugle similarly?
So the bugle itself is essentially the same. However, in my experience, you're not going to have the same kind of experience trying to call a Tule elk the way you would bugle a Rocky. I, for one, do not bugle the Tules. I have in the past been involved with hunts, especially down in Southern California. Early season. Keep in mind. Well, let me backtrack here a little bit. Tule elk are a very unique, special animal. So let's say, in some cases, the bulls start coming out to the cows as soon as they come out of the velvet. In some cases, that could be last week of June. It could be first week of July. And it's like, right now, the Tembler Wildlife Management Area, it's probably 116 degrees down there and it's full rut. And if you're in the more moderate coastal areas, I have seen a secondary estrus cycle where there's a really hard bugle rut period going on in October, and there's a subsequent tertiary estrus cycle in the cow herd that kicks in December, and I've seen the bulls bugling, fighting, and breeding cows in December. So the more moderate the climate, where the seasons are less defined, suddenly you've got this primary estrus cycle in July, but they could be chasing breeding cows all the way until December. Now, with that said, I don't start hunting elk until October. Now, the guys that hunt them in July and sometimes in September, and I've seen it employed, and it does work. You can bugle in a Tule elk, and it works better in some places than others. Mendocino County, it can be really, really effective. Down where I'm at, maybe not so much. You bugle, you can get them to bugle back to locate them, but that bull is not going to leave his cows to come out and fight you. And the bull that is going to come to find you is going to be a satellite bull that in all likelihood you're not going to want to shoot. And so calling to the elk with the bugle, especially Tule Elk, it's not the same as Peak of the Rut in Arizona or Peak of the Rut in New Mexico or Colorado or any of these other places where you can get a herd bull fired up and crowd him, bugle him, and get him to come out. Um, they're it's almost like they don't really want to fight. What they're really interested is they want to bugle and they want to keep the other bull bugling just so they know where he's at. But I have seen in personal experience that as long as the bulls are bugling, they kind of maintain their distance. And then I remember once upon a time, this is up in Mendocino County, I had a bull hunter kill a bull, and that was a bull that bugled all day long.
Wow.
And as soon as that bull was dead on the ground and stopped bugling, this bull that had kept his distance, that was on the neighbors all day, he came over the fence and he took over the cows. Why? Because that bull stopped bugling. And he realized something's changed. That bull's gone. I better go check it out. And and so that was kind of a very interesting dynamic, that I got to witness. And that was one of those experiences where I thought to myself, very interesting. And that's not the only time I've seen that, where bulls will bugle back and forth with their own harem groups, but they really don't have an interest in fighting. I think they're just, one, they're trying to sweet talk the ladies, but two, they're reminding their neighbors, hey, I'm still here, keep your distance. Um, and in my experience, I have not had any success in bugling an elk to me. But I have killed them during the peak of the bugle season. But we instituted different techniques to make that happen.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to answer some of these questions through email. We're not going to be able to get to everybody, but the last question I have for you, Donald, is so if it's not bugling, what's your go-to strategy? What's your go-to tactic for Tule elk hunting? Are you doing like spot and stock? Are you doing like ground blinds? How do you guys usually get this done?
It's almost entirely spot and stalk, I don't crowd those elk. I don't disturb or crowd those elk until, one, we've identified the bull that we really want to go after, and two, I feel like that bull's in a high probability location where we can, one, sneak to a location for whatever our method of harvest is, whether it's rifle, muzzleloader, handgun, archery, um, and we get it done through that means. I have killed some bulls with my bow hunters, putting them on stand where I know these bulls are going to come out between the primary bedding area and their primary feeding area, and I post them generally on the downwind side of where I think the bulls are going to come through. That has worked for us with the bow hunters, because you're suddenly you're trying to force a very close encounter with a bull. My handgun hunter, my archery hunters, we've employed that several times, where we've set up, and it doesn't always go right the first time, and sometimes it takes a bunch of days to do it, to get it done. But if you have the time and you're patient, you can make it happen. Now, I have the luxury of, I'm hunting elk on private. If you're hunting a public land unit, you've really got to be a little bit more aggressive, because especially if you have other tag holders in the unit, if you have an opportunity and you feel good about it, you need to take advantage of the opportunity while it's there. Um, because and it doesn't even have to be another hunter. I've had elk hunts go south with mountain bike riders, with hikers, just walking through with their dogs, just out for a hike, and they just happen to walk right into your setup and booger your elk out. They didn't mean to, and there's no harm, no foul. It's just, that's part of life. It's public land, and everybody has a right to use it. But public land hunting can be a little more problematic, and so you have to strike while the iron is hot. If you have the opportunity, be aggressive, and try to take advantage of the opportunity. But if you can be patient, it can work out for you, especially archery, handgun, muzzleloader. But most of the time, we sneak on them, we set up on them, and especially if they've bedded and they're in their primary bed and you know they're going to lay there for 4 to 6 hours, you can usually get within a comfortable rifle range, and you just got to make sure that you're set up, you're ready, you're on them, and when they stand up out of their bed, you can go ahead and try to execute and take a shot and be successful. Just make sure, try to stay comfortable, make sure you take plenty of water, stay hydrated, because a lot of times you might have to set up, you're totally exposed in the sun, and you got to be prepared to tough it out, because you might be laying there for 3 or 4 hours before the bull stands up to stretch. So,
well, Don, thanks so much for being with us tonight. You're a wealth of information, and I just want to say thank you for all you do for wildlife conservation